Hey everybody, thank you for joining me for National Cannabis News with Cassin. I'm seriously glad to be with you today. Here in Michigan, it is now tending towards fall, so I hope everybody has access to nice sweaters and warm food. I myself just had some really nice infused hot chocolate. Starting the afternoon off good. It's gonna be great. So today we've got a lot to talk about. I feel like at this point everyone is getting used to the subject matter, but in case you were joining us today for the first time on this, my 19th episode of National Cannabis News with me, Cassin Coleman, your host, let me take you through the rundown. So we're going to talk about cannabis, a bust from around the nation, including busts from around the globe. We're going to go ahead and look at what's happening on Capitol Hill. And this week we're actually looking at not just what's happening on Capitol Hill, but what is happening with the Supreme Court of the United States related to cannabis. They are not we are like three major constitutional cases in now that SCOTUS has agreed to see, and we shall see what is going on there. Supreme Court. Pretty cool stuff happening there. We're also going to have a little bit of a conversation about what science has to say about the difference between kids and elders when it comes to cannabis consumption. Something that a lot of people ask me about a lot, and is definitely a portion of the advocacy work that I do, is making sure parents, elders, teachers, caregivers, etc. are all educated about the little changes that can happen in your body depending on age and how cannabis might impact you. And then we're going to talk about what's happening here in Michigan. Lots of great questions coming from people. Biggest thing here, still no draft rules. Womp, womp, womp. But enough about that. We're going to go ahead and get right on into cannabis. I don't know if you guys were able to catch me. I was at the exchange this week here right outside of Detroit in Shelby Township, and was able to meet with a lot of different people. There were multiple organizations that were kind enough to do brief interviews with me talking about their work with those that are behind bars for this plant. And I was very, very happy to be able to talk to them. So if you are interested in how you can contribute and how you can either do fundraising or even just interact with people who are behind bars for this plant, who will appreciate receiving letters and good news from those that are on the outside, that knowing that we are still here thinking about them is helpful. So those organizations exist. Please reach out. I will hook you up with those. And also, they also did say, especially Glenn, the Great Lakes Expungement Network, which is helping people previously convicted expunge those records so they can move forward better, that they will be coming on the show sometime soon to talk about the great work that they do. I'm excited about that. I hope you're excited about that. Making sure that we don't forget that there are still over 30,000 people serving time for this plant behind bars right now in the United States, and that almost 250,000 people were arrested and prosecuted for cannabis crimes last year. I mean, come on, guys. We know at this point that this is still happening, even though you can buy your weed on Facebook. It's still happening all over the world. All right, so let's talk about a few things that are happening across the place. Also, I'm really, really thankful for PDX Canna for continuously supplying all this information. It makes my job easier when reporting the news. I do my own web crawler too, and they always find more. So thank you guys so much, and thank you Future 4200 for being an amazing platform for all of us cannabis junkies, political policy junkies, and science junkies to have a place to talk to each other on a weekly basis. I am forever grateful, and I'm glad that I can be on there with all of you. All right, so we had in Maine, pretty crazy stuff going on over here. People not having access to fresh enough air and leading to poisonings, with people dying because they were growing cannabis illegally and not having good enough CO2 being pumped in, and were actually pumping in carbon monoxide to themselves. A little bit crazy, I know, but if you guys are not aware, most systems that are installed in a regulated state-related manner do have monitoring for those things, so workers don't get impacted and killed like they were in this case. There's just this one instance where being in the traditional market outside of the regulated space probably contributed to making sure, or not making sure, that these workers were safe. So, and in this case, people died and several others were hospitalized. And you know what? That's pretty sad. Workers should never have to die because they're doing work, and if we didn't have the prohibition state that we still have all over the place, even in great places like Maine, where they have had an established medical program and now recreational program for many, many years, right? People are still working outside of that for many reasons. Everything from they couldn't get a license to they couldn't afford a license, right? To they really just don't think that they should have to have one, right? I mean, all of these things happen, and, that's just has to do with overregulation and a prohibition in a state, which is really the United States of America. Okay, moving right along, California continues to be busting, and I mean continues to be busting, unlicensed operators throughout the state. North of the state, central state, south state, all over the place, seizing the cannabis, destroying plants, even for people who have been doing this for a long time. And it is worth it to note that the largest busts now are generally those in areas that have been growing cannabis in the traditional market for generations. So we're really talking about, impacting families in a different way here. Impacting families for a plant that most of us think of as legal, that almost all of us think of as sacred, and that if you had the money and the privilege to get a license, you could grow legally as a business and make commercial in California. So it continues to be messed up that anyone would be going to prison or having their assets seized for this plant, and we should continue fighting against that. And we fight against that by telling our representatives, our legislators, our senators, our governors, our local police captains, our mayors, that we disagree with those practices and we want full decriminalization of this plant, which means not rescheduling but descheduling, which means not just in one city, not just decriminalization for possession, but for the entirety of the plant. Because if you are decriminalized and you can possess it and you can smoke it in your own home or in your neighbor's home or on your back porch, but the guy that's growing it and bringing it to you is still a criminal, that's still not okay. All right, moving right along, we've got a number of other places that are still having these issues. One of the bigger things that I've started to come to realize here is that there are a lot of international parties that are being involved and arrested in the United States, and charged with all different kinds of things, especially in Oklahoma, where the local cannabis regulatory authority is working hand in hand with the Drug Enforcement Agency to crack down on unlicensed operators. Again, it makes no sense to have to do that in Oklahoma, one of the places that it is the easiest to get a license in the United States, but they are doing it, and I think that's quite interesting. We are also seeing what I am really sad to find is that even in places like Michigan, which have had petition-led campaigns to change the laws and prevent people from going to prison, that the courts didn't like it, that prosecutors didn't like it. And so just like they did just about a week ago now in Michigan, they're overturning some of these things by setting precedents in the court cases. And it really is quite sad. We're also seeing that still in lots of places across the country, including Maine, including Michigan, including Colorado, including California, including Arkansas, where they have licensed legal programs, that people are being arrested for anywhere between 1 pound and 100 pounds, sometimes even more than 100 pounds of cannabis. Again, being charged with drug trafficking, right? Which I feel it is worth noting are people, drug traffickers, that former President Trump says should be executed in the streets by law enforcement, right? So this idea that we're still demonizing the plant and calling those that grow the plant and transport the plant and make sure that the community has access to the plant are drug traffickers is inappropriate, I had try to have a conversation with someone recently, and they were like, oh, that's definitely not what Trump means. He just means like all the guys pushing fentanyl. But yet guess what? The guys pushing fentanyl aren't being arrested nearly as often as the guys with the cannabis plant, right? They're not being put in prison for life either. Many a times, they're not being picked up all the time either. Amazingly enough, fentanyl doesn't smell like weed, and you can't just like randomly decide that you want to arrest somebody because they smell like a skunk, which is what police officers have been doing, for 50 years now. So it is worth remembering those things, especially when you're, casually enjoying your cannabis beverage or deciding that you're going to smoke a nice little dog walker on your porch that these things happen, people are still going to prison for this plant. There are still people that are in prison for cannabis today with life sentences. Okay? There are people who have murdered people who do not go to prison for life. But there are cannabis cultivators and commercializers and neighborhood suppliers that are in prison for the rest of their lives. And even if they aren't in prison with a life sentence, they may be in prison for enough years that they will likely die in prison. And that's not okay. And that is happening because of the police state we live in, with the prohibition that we live in. Now, I know we like to think that that's not the case, but we are number one in the nation for the total number of percentage of citizens that are behind bars. And last time I checked, actually total number of citizens that are behind bars. Which is crazy when you consider that our population of our country is not even close to the population of other countries that are out there, right? So these are the kinds of things that are happening, and I hope that you guys are all thinking about it, and I hope that you will consider supporting organizations like the Great Lakes Expungement Network, the Last Prisoner Project, right? The Redemption Foundation, the Commissary Connect, which are all organizations that I was able to talk to while I was at the exchange this week, right outside the Detroit and Shelby Township, right? So I feel like those are some pretty good things for us to have talked about, and I'm glad to share them with you here. Okay, so moving right along. Okay, guys, Scott Us, OMG Supreme Court. So much is happening on there. They're seeing things from across the board. In this case right now, they are literally have just decided that they're going to see this, and that it's looking at the provisions of the Controlled Substances Act, acknowledging that there is a constitutional question here, because in this case, the federal government is trying to prevent intra-state commerce. And technically, which is what lawyers always love, they're only allowed to prevent interstate commerce, right? So there's been a lot of different things that are happening here. The case has made it all the way up to the appeals court. The appeals court said, hey, they're not overturning the previous court. The previous court said, yeah, they agree that the government shouldn't be allowed to do this, which is kind of fabulous. And it's possible, I don't know how likely it is, but when this kind of stuff first started happening, Justice Clarence Thomas came out and was just like, hey, all of this stuff that's happening is literally mixed signals. How can the federal government both continue to arrest people and seize things from people and take a stance that these products are illegal, while simultaneously allowing more than half the states to have licensed programs? Clearly that doesn't make any sense. And I don't often agree with Justice Thomas, but I definitely did here. And I like the quote from Justice Thomas here, which says, one can certainly understand why an ordinary person, like you or me, might think that the federal government has retreated from its once absolute ban on marijuana. Yeah, clearly they have. I like to think it's because we've spent, decades advocating for safe use of the plant, decades advocating for, not criminalizing a plant that doesn't cause harm. But, it could also be that people see that by doing this, we've completely removed a plant from the economy that, as you can see, whether it's fiber or food or seeds or cosmetics, is really quite excellent, not just for its medicinal uses. So I'm pretty happy to see that the Supreme Court will be taking a look at this. We'll be looking at the constitutionality of enforcement of the Controlled Substances Act against state licensed marijuana operators and citizens, and whether or not that's okay, given that they are only doing things within their own states. So I'm excited to see that. Hopefully you guys are also excited to see that. They've been doing quite a few other things as well. You can't not wonder what's going on when you talk about SCOTUS. They've also been taking a look at other things in the past few weeks, and I think we talked about this last week, which is in this case they actually listened already to the case for the gentleman who lost his job regarding using a CBD product which had an THC impurity, and then was no longer allowed to be a truck driver, and is seeking damages. And of course, the court seems split on what those damages look like, whether damages are damages or not. And it looks like it might be a really interesting precedent-setting case that just happens to be about cannabis, but could completely change the difference between did you suffer damages or are you injured? I know they sound like they are the same thing, but again, just like we talked about last week, they are not. And I think that's very, very interesting for everyone here. They're also getting ready to start looking at another case that's going on, Second Amendment rights, which I think is fabulously hilarious, given that the Department of Justice continues to double down that people who consume cannabis are dangerous criminals that should never be trusted with weapons. Ever. While at the same time, we're getting lots of evidence that says in states that have licensed legal cannabis that people can have easy access to, that domestic violence and other violent crimes are down. Could be because they're not drinking. And we all know that drinking does lead to inappropriate behavior, right? It's a known issue with alcohol, right? So I'm excited to see that. I think you guys might also be excited to see that. I wish that there was more out there about it. And I'm considering that it would be totally crazy if we can't manage to change laws through the legislature or through the executive branch getting its crap together. And so the Supreme Court of the United States has to finally come in and be like, you guys are ridiculous. We're getting rid of these rules. I mean, they were set up by Nixon. Why do we still have them? What is going on, America? But what could we possibly do? All right, so there's another big thing that's out there right now. There's a lot of companies that are in New Mexico. These cannabis companies for the last year, almost 18 months, have been having their cannabis and the proceeds from selling their cannabis in a licensed legal market in New Mexico seized by Customs and Border Patrol. Okay, so they have now gotten together and are suing the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol and the Department of Homeland Security for breaching their civil rights regarding, which this is where I really was scratching my head, for their constitutional rights under the Fifth Amendment. Because, of course, here they are driving in vehicles that are licensed, that have documents that clearly say what is there with all of their company names and whatnot on them, also known as like manifests, right? That are then being seized by the government, even though they have said time and time again to stop doing it. And they're also questioning why it is only happening to those of them that are in New Mexico when Arizona and California also have licensed legal markets and are within the purview of Customs and Border Patrol. But if we really started thinking about it, so is Montana, so is Washington State, so is Michigan, so is Minnesota, so is Maine, so is New York, so is Pennsylvania. All of these states also have licensed legal programs. So why isn't Customs and Border Patrol seizing things from all of them? Sounds a little fishy to me. Sounded fishy to me for a while. Of course, Customs and Border Patrol has come back and said, oh, it's because, we're just doing these things because, heightened control checks, and these guys are just being, caught up in the dragnet, which I suppose I could believe if the dragnet extended to all of the other places that are in the area, the region, where they're saying that these bad activities are happening. As though, I don't know when the last time you guys were in Arizona or New Mexico, but those highways, they go through both states. So why only have checkpoints on the New Mexico side, right? That really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But hey, I'm not in Customs and Border Patrol, and I never would be. So there you go. Okay. Right. I feel like that is enough happening on Capitol Hill. So let's go ahead and have a conversation. Oh, hey, Drake Detroit. Sorry, I didn't see your thing there. Let me see what here is it. Drake has said, in Michigan, legislators are trying to remove our ability to external transfer non-intoxicating CBD into the licensed marijuana market. Ooh, yes, I saw that. They're trying to completely repeal the Industrial Hemp Act here in Michigan, which has been around since 2014, which is before the Farm Bill happened in 2018 at the federal level. And he asked, how will patients be able to access hemp-derived medical products when licensed operators can't use CBD from hemp plants? To me, it sounds like they want it to go away or to go back underground. Wow. Yeah, I really think so too. Every time I look at things like this, and, I always question why people want to get rid of programs that appear to be working, why people want to change regulations that people appear to be following, and why they want to make those regulations so difficult to follow that it would, it's literally the risk and reward is so unbalanced that people would rather just participate outside of the licensed legal market altogether. I think the bigger issue, which Drake presented here, is that, in Michigan, we already have issues with the way the hemp rules work compared to other states like, I don't know, Indiana, which is on our southern border. And that's not okay, right? Like, if we're saying, hey, a person in Indiana can make, manufacture, and sell any product they want under the hemp rules, but we can't do that in Michigan, which is what we're saying. It's almost as bad as Indiana saying that people shouldn't be able to have access to cannabis, and are continuing to arrest people in cannabis, right? Like, this is a prohibitionist mindset that just really forgets the plant is the plant, that we evolved with the plant, and that it's important for us to be able to have the ability to move these materials around. I think also, after taking a pretty deep dive into the products that are available in the market, and thank you so much, BDS Analytics, for helping me with that data. You are blessed. I am so glad that you exist and that you keep this kind of data out there. It's something like 15% of all the products that are available in the state have constituents where they're having a non-cannabis derived cannabinoid that's present, whether it's CBD, CBN, CBG, CBC, THCV, like all of these things that are coming from hemp plants that currently are coming into Metric through the Industrial Hemp Act, or I guess it's the Industrial Hemp Research and Scientific Advancement Act, right? It's a lot longer than just the Industrial Hemp Act. That if we repeal that, are we going to just have new rules later? Are we repealing it on Bill 1 and we have another bill and nobody knows what this other bill is yet? I feel like this is important. Clearly, Drake Detroit thinks that this is important. I think we should all think that this is important because it's really, just like we're talking now about cannabis science, that's what we're talking about here. Like, almost as though the legislators and the regulators have no idea about the science at all. And because they have no idea about the science, they're making poor decisions. It's like in California where they decided, oh, we don't want to have any more full spectrum products because there might be minuscule amounts of THC in them, and we don't want any of those products to be available in the California marketplace, which then took all of the RSO, all of the CBD tinctures, all of the CBD capsules that patients had been taking, including children with epilepsy, for years at this point, sometimes 20 years, and now made those products completely unavailable, all because they didn't want there to be trace amounts of THC present, as though having trace amounts of THC hasn't always been present. It has always been present, right? Even in our food supply, if you're getting hemp parts and that kind of stuff, right? But the total amount is minuscule, but it's not completely undetectable, right? And making the products undetectable costs a ridiculous amount of time and energy and refinement, and makes the products less helpful for medical patients, right? It's the science that they just seem to be completely oblivious to, and that is so frustrating for me, and clearly for other people around the country. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the cannabis science and the difference between kids and elders. For an average adult who is not taking any medication, right? Cannabis is going to have a pretty mild impact and effect on them, with limited adverse events like dry mouth, itchy eyes, potentially a cough, right? Euphoria, which a lot of us think of as not a side effect, but actually an intent. But, when you look at, hey, what are things that could be side effects? Euphoria is one of them. So like the feeling of getting high is not thought of as a positive in all spheres, right? Especially if you don't want to be high, but you need the medicinal benefit. Right. And those impacts on, an adult that's not taking drugs of average American adult size, which is pretty big at this point. But, so compared to a small child would be significantly larger. there's really no huge impact, right? So you could overdose, right? You could take too much and the impact to you would be minimal. You might feel unpleasant. Your stomach might be upset. You might be overly sleepy. You might have a bad experience with anxiety or an inappropriate amount of euphoria that kind of gets you too heady and perhaps even hallucinogenic, right? Which again, some people might think of as a positive thing, but many people don't, right? So that's if you're a normal adult not taking any medication. But for elders, we now know, or for adults that are taking other drug products, we now know that there's almost 700 pharmaceuticals that are out there that have interactions with cannabis. And some of these interactions are pretty not nice. I know we talk about this a lot, guys, but it comes up to me for someone who has had an accident, for an elder that ended up in the hospital or the ER, or for really just a person who reaches out and says, hey, I tried this product that I hadn't tried before, and wow, this happened to me. And the first question out of my mouth now when I'm talking to an adult that is a normal consumer but it's having something new is, okay, what other pharmaceuticals are you taking now? And more often than not, what's happened is that either they increased their cannabis usage or they started taking a new pharmaceutical, right, that's then interacting and causing other issues. And these other issues can be crazy, right? There's sometimes where using the cannabis is an antagonist and actually makes the drug work better for you. So it's like you're getting a double or triple dose of the pharmaceutical that you took. And there's a lot, again, like I've mentioned before in other weeks, where the products are designed for your heart and your cardiovascular system in general, and they work super, super good, and they lower your blood pressure a lot, and then that causes you to be faint. Causing you to be faint could lead to fainting. Fainting could lead to falling, right? A disorientation, issues with balance, etc. Right? So those are things that really are happening in the elder community. I feel like it's always important to talk about those things because we do want elders to have access to cannabis. We want them to have access to the social grace that comes from having cannabis. We want them to have access to better sleep, reduced pain, generally just overall reduced malaise, right? These are all things that the cannabis is shown to do in elders. But we also need to acknowledge that the other drugs that they're taking could impact them differently, which is why it's important for cannabis nurses and cannabis doctors and regular doctors and elders and caregivers to have very candid conversations about what's happening so that they can make good choices. In the past, we haven't been able to have these candid conversations. Because we couldn't have the candid conversations, people were being harmed. And the kinds of harms are pretty specific. There's been some research out there that says for the average normal person, use of cannabis products is going to reduce your risk of heart attack and stroke, which is great. On the flip side, for a person who's been taking blood thinners and those kinds of things that just starts using cannabis again, it could actually lead to worse outcomes, right? So more bleeding, strokes, those kinds of things. And that's important. There's an important distinction between the age of the patient, age of the consumer, the other kinds of substances the consumer is consuming. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about kiddos as well. Guys, there's a lot of stuff out there that's like, hey, we got to keep cannabis away from kids as much as possible. It fails to recall that there are lots of pediatric patients out there that really do well with cannabis. The key difference between, there's kids that get it and they're sick, or there's kids that get it and they take it to school and they act inappropriate, and kids that are being helped by cannabis to treat their symptoms, is the interaction between the cannabis and the adult or parent and the child, right? So appropriate methods, it isn't that kids are going to die if they have access to cannabis, right? It's that kids may feel like they're going to die if they consume all of your edibles accidentally. And how would you feel if you had 200 milligrams and you weren't expecting it? You might feel really terrible, right? Oh, JW Cobell, thank you. Yes, always remember to start the dose very, very low for elders and for kids and for yourself, right? If you're trying a new product that you've never tried before, the answer isn't eat the whole bag. The answer is eat a handful of fabulously sugar-coated THC cashews, a small handful, and 30 minutes later, if you're not high as a kite, have another small handful, if you feel like it. But don't eat the whole 3.5-ounce bag of THC cashews, because that could be a very bad 200 milligram chip that you're not expecting, right? The same kind of stuff can happen to kids. Now, when it happens to a little kid and they have no idea what they're doing, they have no idea that the gummies that they just ate aren't regular fruit snacks, and they can't tell you, right? That's when negative things happen. It's a poor experience for the kid. It's a poor experience for the parent. Now the parent doesn't have access to the drugs. The kid's acting lethargic. They're having other issues. And you got to think about this. If 200 milligrams is unpleasant for the 200-pound adult that you are, sorry, I'm just using the average weight of adults in the United States here. For the 200-pound adult that you are, and that's too much, what's it going to do to the 35 to 50-pound toddler? Okay? It's going to be 5 times as much for them. How unpleasant is that? Their little bodies feeling terrible. Now your tummy is a little upset, and now they're vomiting, right? Now you're really sleepy, and now they can't be woken up, right? Like, these are really unpleasant things, which is why, right, the science is pretty clear that they shouldn't have access to it, that if they do have access, they need incredibly low doses, that those incredibly low doses, right, need to be administered in a safe way with an adult present, right? Kids shouldn't just be able to be like, let me have just a little nibble of my own gummy when I'm like 4. That's not appropriate, right? And that in order to make sure that happens correctly, that we talk to kids about it, what they're doing, that they know what they should and shouldn't do, that we keep things locked up from kids that you can't talk to. I know it sounds crazy. You could probably talk to a 5-year-old, maybe a 6 or 7-year-old. Okay. Like, some 5-year-olds just are still not going to get it. Right. And you can teach them, hey, this is what's happening. This is medicine. You don't go around eating it. Right. But ones that are smaller than that, you can't talk to, you just have to keep everything locked up from them. Right. It isn't that they can't know that this is what you're doing, but they need to not be able to accidentally eat your cookie or your cashews or your popcorn or your chocolate bar, right? It is worth noting that even if they ate your entire bag of weed, probably nothing bad would happen to them because the THCA is not decarbed. But it would still be really sad that you no longer had a bag of weed. Right? So all of those things are important. I think the science about this is incredibly important. You know, I'm working with a group right now to create a campaign to discuss this. I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to get that out there and be able to have these rational conversations, because the same people that are often taking care of the kiddos are also doing elder care. And that is seriously important, right? That you don't treat both of those situations the same. And in an elder, 1 milligram might be intense because of polypharmacy. Right? And a kid, 1 milligram is probably still not going to bother them, even though they're tiny, although you should still not give it to them. Right? Like, that's just the way it is. Right? So we have to think about all those things as adults. And if we don't think about those things, bad things are going to happen. All right? I don't know if you guys catch Pokemon, but there are Halloween Pokemon alive in my live stream on Twitch TV today. Go forth and catch things. I'm going to try to catch this Phantomp because he is not always available. And I bet I don't even have a ball. I don't have a ball. Oh, so sad. Not fair. Wah, wah, wah. Someone else, please catch him because he's very cute. And he is wearing a fancy little Pokemon costume right now. Okay, moving on to the next subject here. Let's talk about what's going on here in Michigan. I know we are still not receiving any draft rules, so we can't present public comments. But that does not mean that we can't continue to talk about the summary of the draft rules and all the changes that are out there. I would like to talk about 2 big ones. In this case, remediation, which has also been in the news. Wall Street Journal, etc. have been talking about remediation and, microbial contamination. I think it's important for us to talk about that. And then also for us to talk about, hey, what's going on in the rest of Michigan? I want you guys to know that I went to a really nice place, a nice little walking park, and there were signs up all over the place talking about enjoying fall with cider mills and hay rides in Michigan. Now, as you guys know, I'm from Kansas City, and my family owns an orchard, which includes a cider mill, and it's amazing. It's down Highway 13, just south of Osceola, on your way south to the Ozarks from Kansas City. And I never even considered that other people would be like, hey, yes, we should just hang out at a cider mill and perhaps walk around them just for a pleasant fall afternoon. But apparently that's a thing here in Michigan. So I have decided that I'm going to try doing this on Sunday. And it would be really amazing if we could get someone that wanted to do this and also perhaps have, like, I don't know, infused cider or cannabis available for anybody who showed up. Because I don't do the booze, but, you know, a nice mild cannabis beverage would probably do me good. All right, but moving back to the other draft rules. So we know something new is coming out about remediation. We know that people have been talking about this for a long time. I know our good friend Stacy had talked about this recently and was just like, hey, you know, why is this okay? It's not okay. Why should it be okay that, you know, we have the dead bodies of microorganisms on cannabis in Michigan? Why would that be allowed? You know, I always think about these kinds of things too. You know, I think about endotoxins, I think about mycotoxins, I think about pyrogens, right? These are all things that stay behind after microorganisms are killed. And sometimes I wonder, you know, are they getting into our bodies when we're smoking flower? You know, we don't actually have any evidence that that's the case. But what we do have evidence of is that when we don't kill them or when we leave spores behind that haven't been killed, that definitely those can be aerosolized and inhaled, usually with some kind of vaporizing device like a firefly. There's not a lot of evidence that says that happens when you're combusting things. So I feel like the actual safety ramifications are maybe a little bit unknown and that we could do a little bit more research on that. But the next part of that is like remediation or not remediation. One of the things that I have struggled with a lot in the remediation conversation is that I 100%, you know, started using remediation when I was in Colorado, definitely used remediation when I was in Arizona. When I came to Michigan, people were against the idea of, you know, pre-treating flower rooms to, you know, fumigating flower rooms to, you know, kill off microorganisms. It was really the first place, like here, in my, you know, over a decade of working in cannabis where, you know, people seemed to be against that. Of course, then I, you know, kind of like pulled back the onion layers a little bit more, and I found that actually many people were using these processes, but they weren't considering it remediation. And so that's where I really started to get confused. And I'm hopeful that the new guidance in the draft rules from the CRA will talk about these things a little bit more. You know, if you are treating with vaporized hydrogen peroxide, or if you're treating with ozone, if you're treating with chlorine dioxide, if you're treating with a fungicide or a miticide, or if you are, you know, giving your plants a systemic foliar spray to prevent these organisms from growing on the plant, you know, these are all things that I put in the remediation bucket, right? Where you are intentionally killing off and then preventing the growth of microorganisms. And I have found only a few people that don't do this at all, right? If you are harvesting the plants and then ozonating your dry room, you're remediating. If you're harvesting your plants and then flash freezing them, right? This is a form of remediation. In the pharmaceutical industry, in the food industry, that is a form of remediation, right? Lyophilization, flash freezing is a form of remediation, which is intentionally done to, you know, kill the minimal amounts of microorganisms that might have been present in a pseudo-sterile manufacturing process, right? So, it strikes me as a little confusing that people are doing all of these things and then simultaneously saying that nobody should be able to remediate the weed. And on the one hand, I definitely think that if you can visibly see contamination in a product, you definitely shouldn't be remediating. You shouldn't be treating that product at all, because most methods are not going to treat it enough to have like a 6 log reduction, which is then going to be less than, what would then harm a person later, right? And the total amount of dead bodies left behind, and mycotoxins and pyrogens and endotoxins that are left behind, would just be too much, right? Now, that's how I feel about it, because I came from sterile manufacturing and pharma, right? Like, we start with as clean as you can get. It's not sterile. And in many cases, it's actually limits that are equivalent to, you know, the limit that we have here, right? For cannabis products, but that it's still there. So I feel like we should talk about that. I feel like, you know, in the world of organic food and food production, a lot of these remediation practices happen, but we're also always told, right? You may not be told as the retail customer, but the grocery store is going to get a box that says that, you know, the apples were irradiated, for instance, right? And as I'm sure we are all aware at this point, in the United States, that the only time you can get an organic stamp on your product is if you're not using these processes, right? You can't use radiation or ozonation and those kinds of things in organic processes, right? You can only use natural products to do those things, which doesn't mean they aren't using fungicides and systemics and all kinds of sprays, because they are. It just means the kinds of sprays that they're using are more natural, okay? So I feel like that's really important. And I don't know that the new rules are going to cover that, and that's why I wanted to be able to talk to you all about that. So, okay, let's continue on to the next segment here, which is my Ask Me Anything. I am super excited to say that I continue to get amazing questions from Chuck Ream. Chuck, thank you. Okay, so, one of the questions here was, let's see here, it says, there's like 10 questions here, and the formatting is a little strange. Okay, so has anyone formulated a proposed protocol for cannabis care for institutionalized elder populations? Anybody in Colorado, California, or Canada? Okay, so two things. One, institutionalized elder populations really threw me for a loop, but then I looked into it a little bit more, and I think that just means all elder care facilities, assisted living, etc. Not like they're in prison or something like that. So thank you for making me stretch my brain, Chuck. You do this often, and I appreciate it greatly. Second part is they 100% have this in Canada, and they also have this in the European Union. I know it sounds insane that Europe would be ahead of us, but they are. They have had pharmaceutical grade cannabis in many countries in the European Union for a while, and you can get these products as a pharmaceutical through their state provided medical coverage, which would include those that are living in assisted care facilities, elder care facilities, etc. They've had these for a while. They have all different kinds of products. It appears that most of the products are tablets or flower products, so either someone is smoking something or they're taking a pill, but they do exist. They are made by GMP organizations that are over there, and those seem to be, I'm just going to call it readily available. I found a lot of places that said that they had it. I didn't find anywhere where they were talking about having like nurses or certified nurses aides or anything like that, where they were like loading bongs or bowls or like rolling joints for the people. But I did find that some of the pharmaceutical grade cannabis that is available there does come in already pre-rolled joints, which is similar, I think, to the HIV program that is here in the United States, where existing HIV patients and AIDS patients could have joined that program back in the early 90s and are, receive their drug product from the National Institute of Drug Abuse as pre-rolled joints from the government. There's only like 40 people that are still getting that, but it is something that's there. So that is the case that it is there. There are also a number of facilities in Florida that have mentioned elder care facilities, assisted living facilities, retirement communities, okay? I know it's like a lot of things I'm jumping into the cannabis care for institutionalized elder populations, but that is there, which had that. And then I found a number of hospice facilities that also are using cannabis in their treatment programs. I could not tell if these were, outside private organizations, if they don't receive funding and those kinds of things from the federal government, but they were there, and I felt like that was a good thing. And that the Canadian program is pretty, it seems to be pretty swift. Of course, they have federally legalized cannabis in Canada, so that probably makes a bit more sense there. For me, this is definitely something that when I submitted my comments on rescheduling to the DEA earlier this year, I definitely mentioned, what about the elder populations? It's not okay that someone is, going to end their days and they don't have access to this incredibly amazing substance that helps all kinds of people with all kinds of reasons, right? Whether they're having difficulty sleeping, or their arthritis is hurting them, or they don't feel like eating, right? I mean, wasting is a huge thing for elders, and if you can get them a little bit of cannabis, then they might actually have a better appetite, just like so many other people that use cannabis for this reason, right? So using cannabis to treat anorexia is a thing, y'all, and this happens to elders and elder care situations all the time. I don't know if it's because they don't like the food that they're eating or the changes too much and is getting them away from their routines, but it happens all the time. They lose a lot of weight. Losing a lot of weight then leads to other issues, and then that causes their quality of life to go down and the rest of their life to shorten, which is not okay. All right, so Chuck, thank you so much for asking this question. I'm going to look a little bit more into this. I think this is something that we should be making sure the new rules in Michigan address, right? I did see that the merger bill for MRTMA does say, doesn't matter where you live, as long as you have a lease, that you should be able to consume this as long as you're not smoking, which means as many edibles, topicals, and vaping products as you want, even if you're an elder. And I think that that's seriously important, and let's make sure that continues to be part of the rules. I know it's kind of part of the rules right now, but like, it's expanded language in the merger bill, and I would like to see that happen a bit more and be more strong. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Are there people out there? Let's see. I see Drake Detroit, JW Kobo, Tom Kobo. What? Tom? I'm so glad you're here. Diggy Sows, I see you out there. If you guys have questions and you want to ask me something, now is the time. I'm super glad that the Kobaus have decided to join me today. I've really enjoyed working with them in Michigan. They are fabulous. Okay, let's see here. One of the things that we saw here recently, just because I like talking about crazy shit that happens. Okay, guys. In the news this week, here in East Lansing, Michigan, a few years back, some college freshmen were hazed. And when they were hazed, the hazing included making them get high. And they're now suing the fraternities because of that. Oh, I love Wiki YouTube. I wonder about stuff like this all the time. I still, why haze to begin with? Being in college is terrible enough. But I guess, because they can is probably the reason for that. But in this case, I think I felt like the news, the way it was covered, is just crazy. Hospitalization for a dangerous amount of marijuana is what the name of the article is. But if you actually read the article, it actually looks like he was hospitalized for dehydration and rhabdosis from overworking his muscles. And he also happened to have cannabis in his system because they had, made him smoke a bong with them. It's just one of those things where the way the news covers things sometimes is just frustrating. Another thing that I noted this week in the news just here in Michigan has to do with, a cultivator saying that product was stolen from them. I don't know, $600,000 worth of product is stolen for them. They said, more than 1,000 pounds. And I thought that this was interesting for a few reasons. The first reason was they thought that it was an inside job. And you don't have to wonder about that. I don't know if you guys are aware, but in Michigan, everything you do while you're at a cannabis facility is on camera, right? So if your employees are in the building and they've badged in and you gave them keys and they're stealing all of the weed, it's on camera. You don't have to be like, I wonder if it was my employee, right? The second part, though, that really made me scratch my head was that he said they found the stuff in metric at retail dispensaries. I'm sure you guys also know that in order for material to get from place A to place B, you have to do a manifest with a secure transporter, and they take it from your facility to another facility, and that other facility receives the manifest, and it's in metric, and there's a tracking device for it with RFID tags everywhere. So when they're like, oh yeah, and some of it showed up at retail operations around the state, in metric. Yes, because you made manifests and used secure transport to take it to those places and you just forgot, I don't know that that's really the case, but, it seems really crazy to me that this is the way they're approaching it. Is that my employees were angry because I wasn't paying them. Not kidding. My employees were angry because I wasn't paying them. And now they're stealing my weed, by manifesting it to licensed retailers in the state of Michigan using secure transporters. I mean, it makes no sense at all, but that is literally what was written in the documents today, in the report. Go journalism. I love it. All right. This is like, there was another Pokemon, but I failed to catch it and nobody else caught it either. Such is life. Do we have any more questions from the audience? I'm looking to see if anyone else has asked me questions via email or other methods, because I did start noticing that not everybody is Twitch chatting me. Sometimes people are sending me emails and stuff as well. You guys can always email me. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. You can come by my YouTube channel. I'm around. If you go to my LinkedIn, it'll also give you my direct email and my phone number. So if you wanted to reach out, you could totally do that as well. Those things are on my Twitch page. I have the links specifically there, so you don't have to wonder how to get a hold of me. I try to be available. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming to me in email. Any cool events coming up? Okay. I see how it is. Yes, there are cool events that are coming up. There was just a really cool event that just happened. There is the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association's Winter Gala is coming up in about 6 weeks. I'm pretty excited about that. Green Wednesday is coming up. I don't know if anybody else participates in Green Wednesday activities, but I certainly do. And Pure Options here in Lansing is going to be having a big Green Wednesday affair. And there are a lot of other organizations that are doing similar things. So if you guys haven't looked at that, you should. Let's see here. I want to say there is another big outdoor festival that's happening as well. But now I am blanking on where it is. And if you guys are in Lansing this weekend on Sunday, at the Fledge, there is the Third Eye Festival, which is definitely a festival of people coming together, talking about cannabis, sharing food, looking at cuttings, and, it is a grand time. It's only available to qualified medical patients and those over the age of 21. So bring your med card if you're a youth. Certainly you can come with your parents, and it's going to be pretty awesome. We are also going to be at this thing trying to bring legalization for mushrooms and other entheogens to the Lansing area and maybe even Ingham County, right? That's something that we're trying to do. We've done it in other counties in Michigan. They've done it in Washington and Oregon and Colorado. Like, why not here in Michigan? Natural plants are important for everybody, right? Let's see here. Is there anything else? I'm not seeing anything else. So I think that's about it. Any other questions out there? Thank you, Drake Detroit, for that good question. Okay. Sounds like this is everything. So I thank you guys all for coming to the show and for asking such good questions and for being so supportive of the show. I really appreciate that. I will always try to answer your questions if you want to send them to me. You don't have to just ask me anything right now. You can also swing by my Patreon. Oh, yes. Happy Halloween. It's going to be fabulous next week. Halloween will happen between now and my next show. Hopefully everybody will be enjoying that immensely. November 1st will be our next show. I'll be here for the 4 o'clock hour. It should be good. Well, okay. I feel like there was something else. Let me check my show notes and make sure I've covered everything. Oh, no, I did. It looks good. I'm so glad of this. And if you guys, I'm going to go ahead and put the link in. I do have a Patreon. The Patreon has a quiz. Just kidding. It's a survey. If you want to complete the survey, I would appreciate it greatly. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. This is going to be Cass signing off, and I will see you next week.